There's a book in the Bible where God's name is never mentioned, but his presence has never been more evident, and the reason will shock you. The hidden message in Esther, a prophetic warning for our time, is hidden in every page of this story. It's not just about a courageous queen, it's about what happens when the enemy thinks he's won, but God has already written the ending. Why did God purposefully hide himself in this story? What message did he encode so that only those living in times like these could understand? What you're about to discover will forever change how you view crises in your life. Get ready, because Esther's true message goes far beyond what you imagine. Have you ever noticed that there are only 2 books in the Bible where God's name never appears even once? One is Song of Songs, which speaks of human love. The other is Esther, which reveals how God acts when he seems absent. Imagine the most powerful palace on ancient earth, Susa, capital of the Persian Empire. 127 provinces, from India to Ethiopia, all ruled by one man, Ahasuerus. Columns of white and blue marble, floors of alabaster and gold, curtains of fine linen, a setting worthy of the greatest epic films. But behind this magnificence, something sinister was being plotted. And most shockingly, while deadly conspiracies were brewing in the corridors of power, the true king of the universe was orchestrating a move no one saw coming. Here is the first part of the hidden message. When God hides, it is not because he is absent. It is because he is working so subtly that only in the end do we realize that each coincidence was a perfect divine intervention. And it was exactly in this palace of appearances that the greatest upheaval in ancient history began to be written, with a party that would last 6 months. But that party wasn't just royal ostentation. It was the first move in a divine strategy that would take 5 years to complete. For 6 full months, King Ahasuerus displayed the riches of his kingdom. Imagine 180 days of continuous feasting, wine served in different golden goblets, exotic meats from every province, music, dancing, displays of military might. It was the greatest celebration in human history up to that point. On the last day, drunk with wine and pride, the king had an idea that would change everything. He wanted to show off his greatest possession, the beauty of Queen Vashti. Bring Queen Vashti before the king wearing her royal crown so that she may be seen by the people and the princes in her beauty. Esther 1:11. But then the unthinkable happened. Queen Vashti, the most powerful woman in the empire after the king, looked at the messenger and said a word that would echo through history. No, the silence was deafening. In an empire where disobeying the king meant death, the queen herself had publicly challenged his authority. The advisors panicked. If the queen could say no to the king, what example would that set for all the other women in the empire? Vashti was banished forever. But here's the part of the hidden message that few realize. Vashti's disobedience was no accident. It was God's first step in putting the right person in the right place to save an entire nation. And while Vashti disappeared from history, a young Jewish orphan walked the streets of Susa, unaware that she was being groomed to become the most important woman of her generation. In the simpler quarters of Susa, far from the glitter of the palace, lived a man named Mordecai. He had adopted his orphaned cousin, a young woman whose Hebrew name was Hadassah, Myrtle, but everyone knew her by her Persian name, Esther, Star. Esther grew up knowing 2 realities, the faith of her ancestors and the culture of the empire that had conquered them. She knew when to pray in Hebrew and when to speak in Persian. She knew when to follow the laws of Moses and when to adapt to the demands of the surrounding pagan society. When the decree to find a new queen spread throughout the provinces, something inexplicable happened. Esther was taken to the palace. The biblical text uses a word that suggests she didn't go voluntarily. She was chosen by the local authorities and led through the selection process. For 12 months she underwent the required beauty treatments, 6 months with myrrh oil, an expensive perfume also used to embalm the dead. 6 months with spices and cosmetics. It was as if she were being prepared both for reign and for death. But there was something different about Esther that even the palace eunuchs couldn't explain. Now the young woman was beautiful in appearance and lovely in appearance. Esther 2:7. It wasn't just physical beauty, it was a character that shone through her outward appearance. And when it was her turn to be presented to the king, something supernatural happened, something that would prove that behind every coincidence there is a divine hand writing history. The moment King Ahasuerus saw Esther, the fate of 2 nations was decided forever, though neither knew it yet. And the king loved Esther more than all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins. Esther 2:17. This was no ordinary passion, it was supernatural favor. In the year 479 before Christ, the royal crown was placed upon the head of a young Jewish woman who hid her identity. Before we continue this incredible story, can I take a quick break? If you're realizing there's much more to Esther than meets the eye, like the video, and subscribe to the channel, because biblical revelations like this deserve to be shared. Just a second, then we'll return to our narrative. Here's a crucial part of the hidden message. Esther kept her Jewish identity a secret at Mordecai's command. Why? Because God knew there would come a time when she would need to reveal who she truly was, and doing so would save her people. The king who ruled the people who had conquered Jerusalem fell in love with a daughter of Jerusalem. The emperor who ruled over the Jews made a Jewish woman his queen. He thought he was choosing a wife. God knew he was positioning a liberator. For 5 years, Esther learned the secrets of imperial power, how to influence royal decisions, how to navigate palace intrigue, how to use her favor wisely. She didn't know it, but she was being trained for the most dangerous moment in her people's history. Because while she was establishing herself as the beloved queen, an ambitious man was rising through the imperial ranks, and his plans included the complete extinction of the Jewish race. 5 years after Esther's coronation, the king promoted a man named Haman to the position of prime minister. And with this promotion, the real battle of this story was about to begin. Haman was a descendant of the Amalekites, an ancient enemy of Israel since the time of Moses. The king ordered everyone to bow before him as a sign of respect. Everyone obeyed, except Mordecai. Why did Mordecai refuse? Not out of pride, but out of conviction. As a faithful Jew, he worshipped only the God of Israel. Haman realized the reason for his refusal, and his anger turned into something much greater than personal revenge. It became planned genocide. Haman didn't act on impulse. He cast lots to choose the perfect day to carry out his plan, month after month, until the lots indicated the 13th day of the 12th month. 11 months of preparation for a complete massacre. So Haman went to the king with a proposal that seemed impossible to refuse. There is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, and their laws are different from those of all other peoples. If it pleases the king, let a decree be issued that they be destroyed. Esther 3:8-9. And he offered 10,000 talents of silver, a fortune, to finance the operation. The decree was sealed with the royal ring and sent to all 127 provinces. In a single morning, the death sentence of an entire nation was signed and issued. Haman had absolute power, unlimited resources, and full royal support. But here is the part of the hidden message that Haman did not know. When God's enemy seems to have absolute victory, that is exactly the moment when the invisible God begins his final play. When the letters reached the provinces, the lament spread like wildfire throughout the Jewish region. But it was what happened in Susa that changed everything. Mordecai tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and put ashes on his head. He went out into the city, crying out with a loud and bitter cry. In the streets, squares, and synagogues of Susa, the weeping was heard in every direction. It was then that Esther learned of the decree from her servants. When she sent Mordecai clothes to stop publicly displaying mourning, he refused. The message was clear. The situation was more serious than protocol or appearances. Mordecai asked for something that sounded like a death sentence, that Esther go to the king and intercede for her people. Her response was terrifying. All the king's servants know that any man or woman who enters the king's inner court without being called shall be put to death, except the one to whom the king extends the golden scepter. Esther 4:11. Then Mordecai spoke the words that reveal the heart of Esther's hidden message. If you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Esther 4:14. Esther's response was simple yet revolutionary. Go, gather all the Jews together, and fast for me 3 days. I and my maidens will also fast like that. And so I will go in to the king, though it is not according to the law, and if I perish, let me perish. Esther 4:16. And it was during these 3 days of fasting that the real battle began, not in the palace halls, but in the spiritual realm, where the prayers of a desperate people were about to move the hand of the invisible God. On the 3rd day, Esther dressed in her royal robes. She wasn't sure whether she was preparing for a banquet or her funeral. But something had changed during those 3 days. A supernatural courage had replaced her fear. When she entered the inner courtyard unbidden, all eyes turned to the throne. The king could either extend the golden scepter or order her immediate execution. The silence lasted an eternity. And it came to pass, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight, and the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. Esther 5:2. More than forgiveness, it was favor. The king offered to give up to half the kingdom, but Esther did something unexpected. Instead of immediately denouncing Haman, she invited the king and Haman to a banquet. Why? Because she understood something about God's timing. There are times to speak and times to position the pieces in the right place. Haman left the first banquet feeling invincible. He thought he was at the pinnacle of his career. But that very night, something extraordinary happened that would change everything. The king couldn't sleep. Instead of calling in musicians or storytellers, the king asked to read from the royal records. And, by coincidence, he came across the record of how Mordecai had saved the king's life years earlier by exposing an assassination plot. Herein lies the heart of the hidden message. What appeared to be ordinary insomnia was actually God rewriting history overnight. Every page the king read, every memory that resurfaced, every decision he made, all orchestrated by the invisible hand of divine providence. And when the sun rose, the man who had built a gallows for Mordecai was about to discover how God's justice works in perfect and ironic ways. The next morning, the king discovered that Mordecai had never been rewarded for saving his life. And just then, by coincidence, Haman arrived at the palace to ask permission to hang Mordecai. The king asked, "What shall be done for the man whom the king delights to honor?" Haman, thinking he was talking about himself, suggested the highest honor possible: royal robes, a royal horse, a royal crown, a parade through the city. The king replied, "Hurry, take the robes and the horse, and do so to Mordecai the Jew." Esther 6:10. Haman had to lead the man he planned to kill through the streets, shouting, "Thus shall it be done to the man the king delights to honor." The humiliation was total, but that was only the beginning. At the second banquet, Esther finally played her final card. "If I have found favor in your sight, O king, let my life be given to me at my request, and my people at my supplication. For we and my people have been sold to be destroyed." Esther 7:3-4. The king's shock was total. Who is this, and where is he, that he dared to think of doing such a thing? Esther pointed out directly, "The adversary and enemy is this wicked Haman." That same day, Haman was hanged on the 75-foot gallows he had built for Mordecai. Divine justice was fulfilled so perfectly, it seemed like a movie script, but it was the hand of God working through impossible coincidences. But Haman's death didn't solve everything. The decree to exterminate the Jews was still in effect, sealed with the king's ring, and it was then that Esther's true prophetic message was fully revealed. With Haman dead but the decree still in effect, it seemed victory had come too late. But here is where the hidden message in Esther reveals its full prophetic power. The king gave Esther and Mordecai the authority to write a new decree. Since the first could not be revoked, they created another. The Jews could defend themselves and destroy any force that attacked them on the day appointed for their extinction. What happened on the 13th day of the 12th month was supernatural. Instead of being victims, the Jews became victorious. Instead of mourning, there was celebration. The day planned for their destruction became the day of their liberation. Esther and Mordecai established the festival of Purim, celebrated to this day, so that no generation would forget how God can turn mourning into joy, defeat into victory, extermination into deliverance. Here is the prophetic message that was hidden all along. When the enemy devises perfect strategies, when he seems to have all the resources and support he needs, when the decrees are already signed and destruction seems inevitable, that is exactly when God reveals that he was in control all along. The absence of God's name in the book is not a flaw. It is intentional. He wanted us to see how his hand works through seemingly natural events, how his providence works through ordinary people, how his justice prevails even when he seems silent. And that is the hidden message that echoes through the centuries. No matter how powerful the enemy, how elaborate the plan, how desperate the situation seems, God is writing a story of redemption that only fully reveals itself at the end. Now you understand why this story was preserved for such a time as this. The hidden message in Esther is not just about the past. It is a prophetic warning for those living in times of seeming chaos and impending destruction. Here is the current prophetic warning God encoded in this story. When you are facing your Haman, that situation that seems to have absolute power over your life, unlimited resources to destroy you, and the total backing of circumstances against you, remember that God is positioning you for a supernatural turnaround. You may be living your decree of extermination right now, that problem that seems already decided, sealed, irreversible. But Esther's message whispers, the same God who rewrote history overnight can rewrite your story today. Just as Esther was positioned for such a time as this, you have been placed where you are, your family, your job, your city, your influence, not by chance, but for a specific moment of divine intervention. Your current position can be your platform for liberation. The lessons are clear. First, God is most active when he seems most silent. Second, his justice may seem slow, but it is always perfect. Third, what the enemy intends for evil, God turns for good. Fourth, coincidences are divine interventions in disguise. The question that echoes from the days of Esther to this day is, who knows if you were not meant to reach this point for such a time as this? Your current crisis may be your coming coronation. Your valley may be the path to your palace. Your gallows may become your enemy's gallows. This is the hidden message God hid in Esther for you to discover today. He's writing a story of redemption in your life that will only be fully revealed at the end. And when it is revealed, everyone will see that every detail, every timing, every coincidence was orchestrated by the God who works behind the scenes of human history. If you've made it this far, it's no coincidence. Just as Esther discovered her identity and purpose in a moment of crisis, you may be discovering yours now. The hidden message in Esther, a prophetic warning for our time, is this. God is most present when he seems most absent, most active when he seems most silent, closest to victory when defeat seems inevitable. Consider this. What is your Susan Palace, where God has strategically positioned you? What is your Haman, that problem that seems to have absolute power over your life? And what is your moment of courage, when you need to risk everything to see God act? Share in the comments. After learning about Esther's true message, what situation in your life have you seen differently? Your story may encourage someone who is experiencing their own decree of extermination. And if this revelation touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who needs to know that God is writing a story of redemption even when he seems silent. Remember, you are not here by chance. Like Esther, you were chosen for such a time as this. The same God who transformed an orphan into a queen, who converted a decree of death into a decree of life, who turned a day of mourning into a day of joy. The same God is writing your story of victory now. May you have Esther's courage to face her giants, Mordecai's wisdom to discern God's timing, and the certainty that he who began a good work in your life will complete it. For such a time as this, you have been chosen.